Daft Punk's Random Access Memories is the band's fourth and final studio album. The duo certainly knew how to bow out in style, with the record being their most ambitious by far, incorporating their tried and tested electronic setup with live musicians and an array of top-tier collaborators, all at no expense spared. It took 5 years and over $1 million to make, with Thomas and Guy using some of the world's finest studios, Henson, Conway, Capitol, Electric Lady and Gang Studios back in their native Paris. The album is an incredibly ambitious project at any time in the history of music, let alone in the 2010s, when laptop producers dominated the electronic music world. Their belief in the notion that the zenith of music making peaked in the 70s and 80s compelled them to pursue similar virtues, employing the best musicians, playing in the best studios through the best gear, the hope being to make music that other producers might one day sample. The benchmark in terms of sonics were Michael Jackson's Thriller, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, Fleetwood Mac's Rumours, and the Eagles' Hotel California. Quite surprising choices for a group rooted in electronic dance music, but their quest ultimately led to a decision to record directed tape, using only analog gear in the process and purposefully avoiding any plugins. These analog recordings were then transferred to Pro Tools later for arranging and mixing. The initial recording sessions got underway at Henson Studios, where Thomas and Guy had set up a choice selection of synthesizers, like Sequential Circuits Prophet 5, the Roland Jupiter 6, Roland Juno 106, and the Yamaha CS80. They also had a vintage Modcan modular synthesizer, and of course vintage vocoders for their signature sound. The giant Modcan synth can be heard on Giorgio by Moroder, playing the layered arpeggiated parts. The vocoder they used was the Sennheiser VSM 201, although they also employed the modern Digitech Talker as well, and there's some debate as to which was used on what song, but they appear to be the main effects used to get the robot voice. Due to its association with Daft Punk, the Digitech Talker has become very sought after and can fetch quite a hefty price these days. Engineer Peter Francois remembers the early sessions. The synth arpeggio in the Giorgio Moroder track was one of the ideas we recorded during these first sessions. With layers of arpeggios played via MIDI, Guy and Thomas are masters of manipulating gear and getting great vibes from them. These were fun and very loose writing sessions, and to my surprise, quite a bit of the themes and even some of the parts ended up in the final mixes. The plan was to seek out a roster of musicians to record the parts they'd previously written, then take these building blocks to construct the songs with. These musicians included Nathan East and James Genus on bass, known for their work with Herbie Hancock amongst others, Omar Hakim and John Robertson on drums, both whom had worked for Michael Jackson, with John Robertson famous for his work on Off the Wall. Chris Caswell, who worked with Smokey Robinson and Bill Withers, was drafted in on keyboards and was also responsible for many of the album's orchestrations and arrangements. The main sessions to record the live musicians took place at Conway Studios in LA. Mick Gazowski, who was the other main engineer on the album, remembers how the recording setup was extremely well thought out from the beginning. It was about choosing the right microphones and mic positioning and mic pre's. I used very little EQ when tracking, and also during mixing. We didn't want the album to sound EQ'd, we wanted it to sound as natural as possible. It's very much the old way of doing it, using EQ just to touch things up, and not doing anything drastic. Our choices made subtle differences, with API mic pre's sounding nice and punchy and being great for kick and snare, while Neve mic pre's are a little bit more airy and worked well for overheads on the drums. An example of this was the way they used 4 mics for the kick drum, the AKG D112, a Sony C500, a Neumann U47 FET and a subspeaker. The characteristics of these mics were then blended to get the sound they needed. The rest of the kit was mic'd up with a Shure SM57 on the snare top and an AKG C451 underneath. The toms were Sennheiser 421s, and the overheads were Shep's CM5Us. They had Neumann U67s as room mics, but they didn't play much of a part in the overall mix due to their desire for a dry, tight sound. Gazowski said, they really wanted that 70s drum sound, recorded in studios, which were wall-to-wall carpeted, making them very dead in the top end. Today's studios aren't like that at all. We still got a little bit of room sound in, and this actually added a nice sparkle to the sound and modernised it a little bit. The bass guitar was recorded with a DI, via a Neve 1081 and a Teletronics LA2A. Chris's keyboards were also DI'd, though the Fender Rhodes was mic'd with U87s, and for the piano, they placed DPA mics over the hammers and U67 back where the strings cross. During the mix, the U67 was in the centre and the DPAs were panned left and right. They had 3 different mics on the guitar cabs, the SM57, the Royer 121 and a Neumann U87. They would then listen to them to decide which ones they liked best. For guitar room mics, Neumann U67s were used. The mic pre's used on the guitars were the Neve 1073, and in some cases they took a DI also, with the final sound and blend depending on the song. The acoustic guitar was recorded using a Schoeps C5U going through a 1073. All the recorded signals were split and then sent to both tape and Pro Tools. The tape player used was the Studer A827, running 24-track ATR tapes at 15 inches per second. The first 23 tracks would have been directly recorded to Pro Tools, and right underneath that they had the same 23 tracks, but coming from the analog tape. During the next 1.5 years, work on Random Access Memories continued according to the same pattern, with Guzowski recording live musicians in studios in LA, while a few other sessions with live musicians, including Nile Rodgers, took place in Electric Lady Studios in New York. The rest of the recordings were done at Gang Studios in Paris. The vocalists, Paul Williams, Pharrell Williams, Todd Edwards, Julian Casablancas, Panda Bear and Giorgio Moroder, were all recorded at Gang Studios. After the Conway sessions, they went over to Capitol Studios to record the orchestra, and by this stage, the dual analog and digital signal paths meant that the sessions were becoming huge. The 8-minute track Touch, featuring Paul Williams, apparently consisted of 250 different parts. The endeavour of recording both analog and digital proved to be worth it in the end, as they were able to choose what they preferred depending on the part. The analog and digital versions were very similar but subtly different, Guzowski said. The digital was slightly crisper and the transients were better, but in some cases we needed the more laid-back sound of the analog. The important thing was that we had choice for the entire project. I know we picked the tape quite a bit because it sounded so much sweeter. At other times we wanted the punch of digital. Mixing took place over a period of 2 months at Conway Studios C on a Neve 88R, the same place where Guzowski had recorded many of the live musicians, he remembers. They came in with edited and finished Pro Tools sessions, which were very well organised and cleaned up. The guitars, again, were very simple. I didn't do much to them. With Nile, we just put the fader up, and to make it fit in a little bit better in the mix, add some 5K on the desk, and that was it. I don't think we used any outboard on him. He simply had his sound, and it was great the way it was. The album was released following a string of promotional campaigns that led to huge anticipation. The singles such as Get Lucky and Lose Yourself to Dance, featuring Pharrell and Nile Rodgers, were massive worldwide hits, pushing the album to the top of the Billboard charts and collecting multiple Grammys on the way. It was a hugely ambitious project that went against the modern approach to record making. Of course, they were in a good place to take these risks given their previous success, but it still remains an ambitious and triumphant finale to an incredible career.